The Faroe Islands are a small group of islands in the North Atlantic, roughly halfway between Norway and Iceland. For most of their history, they belonged to Norway, which made perfect sense due to their geographical proximity. Nowadays, however, they belong to Denmark, which is far away and no longer wants to give up the islands. They are of immense strategic importance to Denmark and represent an important outpost in the battle for the Arctic. Today we take a look at the exciting history of this remote group of islands, how they came to be owned by Denmark and why they will play an extremely important role in the future. Enjoy the video. The Faroe Islands consist of 18 large islands, 17 of which are inhabited, and a total of 779 other archipelagos. They were formed by volcanic activity and the glaciers of the Ice Age. The first known settlers on the islands were Irish monks who set out for the islands in the 8th century AD and settled there. They were followed in the 9th century by the so-called Norsemen. They also gave them their name, which means Sheep Islands in Old Norse. Many of the early settlers came from Norway in search of a new home. And as the population grew steadily, a political administrative body was created, known as the world's first parliament. This is where the leaders of the various villages met and voted together on the most important decisions. However, the Norwegian king did not like the fact that more and more Norwegians were immigrating to the islands and therefore sent his soldiers to take possession of the islands. From around the year 1000, they belonged to the Kingdom of Norway and remained there until 1814, although the balance of power in Norway changed repeatedly during this time. This resulted in a personal union between Norway and Denmark in the 14th century. Over the centuries, however, Denmark increasingly took on the leading role within this union, as a result of which Denmark also increasingly took control of the Faroe Islands. In 1814, in the course of the Napoleonic Wars, this union finally broke down and Norway switched to a personal union with Sweden. Denmark, on the other hand, remained alone and received Greenland, Iceland, and the Faroe Islands as part of the Treaty of Kiel. The inhabitants of the Faroe Islands were not at all enthusiastic about this. They always emphasized their independence due to their great distance from the European mainland and their own language and culture. They were actually striving for independence so that they could manage things themselves again. But Denmark was determined to hold onto the territory. The existing Faroese parliament was abolished, a Danish judiciary was established, and Danish was introduced as the official language. Politically, this led to repeated independence movements on the islands over the next few decades, but economically they benefited greatly from being part of Denmark. Denmark promoted an export-oriented commercial fishing industry. This created a modern market economy on the islands, increased prosperity, and also boosted population growth. And this is still the most important economic sector on the Faroe Islands today. It accounts for 95% of export earnings. During the Second World War, Denmark was conquered by the Germans, whereupon the British took possession of the islands to protect them from a German invasion. Even though they were later returned to Denmark, the desire for independence from Denmark grew again. The islands narrowly voted for independence in a referendum, but this was not recognized by Copenhagen. Nevertheless, the government in Copenhagen had to make concessions to the islands, which is why they were given significantly more autonomy from 1948. Self-government was established under the authority of Denmark with its own flag and currency. The Faroese language was also given equal status with Danish. Unlike Denmark, the islands are still not part of the European Union. Nevertheless, the islands still officially belong to Denmark today. Due to the increasing importance of the Arctic, in which Russia and China in particular want to play an important role, Denmark also recognized the strategic importance of the islands. This year, the Danish Ministry of Defense announced plans to install an air surveillance radar on the islands in order to strengthen Denmark's defense and surveillance capabilities in the Arctic. If the Arctic continues to thaw in the coming decades, the islands will also play an important strategic role as a base for expeditions to the north and for the extraction of raw materials such as oil and gas. Today, around 50,000 inhabitants live on the Faroe Islands, which is roughly equivalent to the population of Greenland, which has a similar role and remains part of Denmark despite having autonomy rights.